And I want you to give it up, a warm welcome to Beatriz Beckford, who's going to kick things off. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Oh, we got a full house here. Looks good. Y'all look good. All right. Do I need to do anything to get this started, or is it just... There we go. All right, so I'm gonna try to keep tight because I know I'll get yoked off the stage if I don't. Let me see a show of hands real quick. How many people got a boo? Don't be shy. If you have a boo, raise your hand. Okay, how many of y'all have a movement boo? Oh. Boo is like your special friend. Oh, a lot more hands go up with that, okay. So I'm gonna start by just sharing a little bit about two of my movement boos. Harriet, I hope you all know who Harriet Tubman is, and Frederick Douglass. And I lift these two folks up because they, for me, are the embodiment of what dynamic transformative movements should look like when they are embodied within us as people, right? So you have Frederick, who was an amazing organizer. He worked with, other organizers. He worked with the enslaved folks. He worked with politicians, some who didn't feel like people that looked like him or had the same skin color as him were even human beings. But he still, in being rooted in his values, felt as though it was important to be dynamic and intersectional in working with those folks also. And Harriet took a different approach, right? She said, I'm gonna go free some folks. And I think it's important to acknowledge that when we talk about abolition, we talk about movement strategies and the way that we make change in the way that we want to see change happen, that we include all of these tactics, right? It's not any one person, it's not any one thing or any one skill or any one strategy. It's a culmination of a layer of all of these things that allow us to get to the things that we want to see. And so for me, these two are an embodiment of that. And they give us so many gifts, right? One of the things that Frederick Douglass said is that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And for many of you all, I know you know that. In my mind, when I think of these two sometimes, it's Harriet and Frederick walk into a bar, and Frederick says power concedes nothing without a demand. And Harriet says, well, demands without sustained organizing and actions that directly confront those who abuse power and perpetuate oppression yield little to no concessions. And then she kind of sashays out of the bar and goes and frees another 300 slaves. Another thing that I want to lift up with respect to movements and strategies and organizing, not just in the work that I do in the States, but internationally, is that we don't live single-issue lives, and Audre Lorde said this and encapsulated it in some of the most beautiful ways in the way in which she embodied both Black radical feminism and queer politics, right? And the reality is intersectionality is reality. It is what our lives are full of. We have people who are dealing with a whole host of issues, and they don't, sit one day and say, okay, I'm just gonna deal with the fact that I'm an indigenous person right now, or I'm gonna deal with the fact that I'm poor today, or tomorrow I'm gonna deal with the fact that I need to figure out where I'm gonna get my next meal, right? All of these issues are highly intersectional, and in order for us to have effective strategies, we need to affirm that intersectionality is our reality. In addition to intersectionality, we also have to acknowledge the way in which all of these identities, all of these social issues play on specific people. Some people face far more obstacles with respect to oppression than others do. And when we're able to hold that, we're able to come up with better strategies, we're able to hold space for others and their struggle, and we're better able to be allies, right? And I often hear sometimes folks say, well, what can I do to help? Allyship is a critical piece to organizing. It's a critical piece to building movements that are effective, that lift up the plight of those who are most vulnerable and help us build what I believe that we all deserve, which is the beloved community. So how do we do it, right? We have to strategize constantly. If the slide does not affirm that, I will add a couple more strategizing in capital letters for you. But we have to strategize constantly, and what that means is we have to listen, we have to be creative, we have to be willing to make mistakes, because if we don't try and succeed, or we don't try and fail, we don't know how to make those shifts that we need to make those movement pivots that are so critical to addressing the way in which oppression shifts and changes all the time as well. We have to be willing to learn from each other, to make mistakes, again, to laugh. We have to be willing to celebrate each other, to celebrate the wins that we have in this work, even if they're minor wins. We have to celebrate all of it, because in doing so, we celebrate each other. And we have to repeat, rewind, and continue to do it. We can never stop. It is a critical piece to consistently be doing that type of an in-depth analysis and pause in the work that we do. So there's some specific things, and so I work with groups all over the US. I essentially travel the country teaching people how to organize around issues that impact them, and to do it in both transformative and intersectional ways. So I work with groups in the Southwest that are dealing with both immigration issues, prison issues, and farm agriculture issues, right? I work with folks in parts of the country like Detroit who are facing water crises, economic crises, and a whole host of other issues, and help them to come up with strategies that they already know, right? It's not me going there and saying, here is the toolkit, the Midwest organizing guide on how you should do this, right? It's effectively saying that there is wisdom in the grassroots, and when we tap into that wisdom, when we resource it in the ways that it needs to be resourced, we are equipping the people who are most best positioned to deal with those issues, to strategize and be creative in how they address those issues, and to make those solutions be sustainable. We're providing them with the resources to be able to do that effectively. So we have to organize. And when I say organizing, I know sometimes there's a lot of different ways in which people define that. But for me, it's making sure that we are engaged in a sustained series of activities and events and actions that ultimately move us towards social justice. And that can be political education, it can be institution building, it can be base building, door knocking, you name it. If you're on Twitter constantly cursing out a prime minister because they're not doing the right thing, we need to be doing that consistently and in a sustained way. And it has to be connected to other organizing efforts, because you cannot organize in isolation. And I also just want to affirm that organizing is essentially what's going to get us there. I think sometimes folks feel like if they just go to a march one day, that it's going to change, and that's not the way it changes. Organizing is the most unsexy occupation you can engage in your life. And I think sometimes you have moments where it looks cute, like when you find out Obama was an organizer or something, but it's not sexy, it's not that sexy. And we have to make it sexy ourselves and honor those moments that we do, but it is ultimately the only thing that's going to help us get to that beloved community again. I want to lift that up. Organizing is what's going to get us there. So the other strategy I want to lift up is we have to tell our stories. Storytelling is reclamation, right? Of our voices, of our histories, of our narratives. Storytelling in and of itself is resistance. And I don't mean storytelling that is an interpretation of the stories of people who are most affected. I mean storytelling that authentically comes from people's lived experiences. You know, I'm not saying don't share if somebody shared with you what their struggle is, but when you create pathways so they can tell their own stories, you become a better ally and they become self-determining, and that is important. One of the projects that I've been working on is called What Ferguson Means for Food Justice. And it's a series that honors the work that Black organizers are doing across the US to deal with both racial injustice, police violence, and honestly, violence at the hands of a corporate food system in the US, which we all know way too much about. And so this is a way of giving space to honor the work that they're doing in communities in direct resistance to that, but also making it so that their stories are accessible to other people so that we can learn from the strategies that they're employing in their own communities. And I encourage you to check it out. Okay. We have to confront power by engaging in direct action. And I'm going to spend a good amount of time on this. This is not something new. Our communities have been doing this for a long time, putting their bodies on the line to resist. And it is a critical piece of organizing, and one that too often, and I know within the US too often, when it comes to the food movement, is underutilized. It is effectively the language of the unheard. And when people are able to put their bodies on the line, right, or to use their physical being to be able to express the pain in which they face on an everyday basis because of oppression, it is not only healing, It is liberating, and it creates kinship bonds that are what movements are all about. Movements are highly relational. Again, it's a critical piece of organizing. Sometimes direct action tactics come up in more organic ways, and when they come up in organic ways, they arise as a result of the overwhelming pain that oppression exerts on all of us, right? So this is a picture of an action. Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it an action, but it was an event that was rooted in action in response to Mike Brown's death. And the reality is, when you look at this, it looks like as the media would like to portray it, somebody who just threw a bomb, threw some ignited thing at the police. But this was actually thrown in the direction of children and families by the police, and this person was taking it to throw it back to protect them. He did not know them at all. He just had recognized them from being in his community. And so we also have to, this is why we have to tell our own stories, because it can look a vastly different way. I want to lift up, it's a critical piece of organizing, and that when it's led by frontline communities, it's beautiful. These are farm workers who have faced sexual assault, stealing of wages, and a whole host of other labor issues, who designed and created their own banners to protest that. I'm out of time. So the last thing I just want to lift up is that direct action gives us a chance to be prefigurative. It allows us to embody the world that we want to live in, and not just in theory, but in practice, right? So when we don't want to see a Confederate flag that is a symbol of antebellum slavery in the States, we take it down. When we want to be able to sit at counters that we weren't able to sit at, we sit there anyways, because it shows our communities, it shows the world, the type of community and the type of world we want to live in. We have to be in togetherness. And I mean that. I think too often we get so bogged down in being in silos and the day-to-day kind of transactional work of organizing and movement building that we don't realize that we have to be in togetherness with the person who's next to us. And that togetherness, relationship building, and being in kinship with each other is a strategy. And that means building together, it means organizing together, taking action together. That's how we heal. It's not a 9-to-5. It's an embodied way of being. And that embodied way of being shows us how we have to act every day in our higher selves. And the reality is that it's hard and it's a struggle, but we can do it. And when we're in togetherness, it's easier to do. Lastly, this is a piece of artwork. So one of the groups the coalitions that I helped to form is a national youth network that has over 100 youth social justice organizations doing work around food, land rights, and a whole host of other social issues that affect young people in the States. And we talk a lot about the beloved community. This was a drawing that one of the young people did that was plastered up for a banner drop that we did for one of our actions in Detroit. And it's the embodiment for me of the way in which Dr. Martin Luther King talked about the beloved community. The end is reconciliation, the end is redemption, the end is creation of the beloved community. And lastly, I just want to give a quick shout out or screenshot there to a bunch of groups across the country, and there's so many more that I want to encourage you to learn from. I'm doing a workshop tomorrow, and I'll be talking a lot about that. But these are groups: the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, Freedom Food Alliance, the Prison Bus Project connects people who have incarcerated family members to farms that provide them with food for those long prison trips, because oftentimes it's 3 and 4 hours together to visit their loved ones. The Detroit Black Community Food Network, Rooted in Community, is the national youth network that I mentioned. Cooperation Jackson, People's Water Board is managing a lot of the organizing that's happening in Flint around the water crisis, and in Detroit when they were turning off water in people's homes who had bills of $100. And so, yes, there's so much that we can learn from each other. We have to be in togetherness. We have to be willing to be in direct confrontation with the state through direct action, and we have to organize, organize, organize. Thank you very much.